Make no mistake about it, our balls are under attack.
In the TED Talk, you mentioned the fact that in a few generations, you think that the growing level of infertility will be almost to the point of us going extinct.
If we don't take action, I believe that in 20 years from now, the entire male population will be infertile and impotent.
Why isn't that message getting out there?
You could look at a 40-year-old guy today, for example, and his free testosterone is almost half of what it was 20, 30 years ago. That's crazy. Women drive most healthcare decisions. The wives are the ones that get men to seek attention. So for sure, women out there, get your dude tested. I like to look at low testosterone as a symptom of an underlying problem, not the problem itself. Doctors are telling patients, no, you're fine. You're in the reference range. You're, God forbid, the word normal. It's bullshit.
What might people need to be paying attention to if they think that their testosterone is affecting their health?
So,
Dr. Tracy, welcome to the Meat Mafia podcast. A pleasure to have you.
hey guys, thanks so much. Glad to be here.
We're so pumped to have you here. We were saying before we hit record, there are so many topics that you talk about that we're personally fascinated in. You know, we're right in that like millennial demographic. And even though we're just about 30 years of age, it's amazing to see the discrepancy already between guys that we went to school with for the threshold of men that take care of themselves versus the guys that are kind of falling into that standard American lifestyle and the discrepancy that's already forming. But I listened to your TED Talk before this, and there were 3 stats that I wanted to read off for the audience because they were super informative, and I think they paint a really good picture of what's going on. So you mentioned that 3 out of 4 men are currently overweight or obese, which is 123 US men. Sperm count and fertility rates are 1/2 of what they used to be half a century ago. And free testosterone levels are down 50% of what they were a few decades ago. I mean, what does that feel like to hear that played back to you? I mean, those stats are abysmal. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's scary. And you know, I call it a men's health crisis, a men's health epidemic, testosterone epidemic. I use all these words to try to get people to just recognize what a big problem this is. And it still surprises me that it does not get enough attention, and how many young men are shocked when they find out that their T levels aren't where they're supposed to be. And it's a worldwide problem. You know, we could talk about a lot of the causes, but it suffices to say it's happening around the world.
It's really interesting to see. I guess just like from a guy who's just entering my 30s, it's interesting to see the drop off. Brett alluded to this, just the drop off in overall health, just between 2 groups of people who are paying attention to their health and people who aren't. And I imagine like the testosterone crisis really coincides and aligns with that. Like, you know, people who are generally in good health, like are still able to generate testosterone at levels that their prior generations could. But then there's this other cohort that seems to be growing, the stats that Brett read out, that like it's almost it's really sad to see. And in the TED Talk, you mentioned the fact that in a few generations, you think that like the growing level of impotence and infertility will be almost to the point of us going extinct. Is that something that you think people are aware of, or like why isn't that message getting out there?
Yeah, great question. I'm not sure why it's not getting more attention, but I do believe that strongly. You know, the data is clear. There were 3 massive studies. One was here in the US, the Male Massachusetts Aging Study. There were 2 others in Europe, one in Sweden and one in Finland. And these longitudinal studies all looked at men over 20 to 30 years. And they found that levels are dropping by about 1% a year. And so you could look at a 40-year-old guy today, for example, and his free testosterone, which is the bioavailable active form of testosterone, is almost half of what it was 20, 30 years ago. And that's crazy when you think about that. And it's getting worse every year. And so unless we start to make some real changes and pay attention, and you made a great point that there are a lot of men who are starting to stand up and pay attention and start to, you know, focus on what can I do to mitigate this. And other men don't find out until sometimes it's too late.
Yeah, there's effectively the neutering of the modern male that's been going on for the last few decades. And we love seeing someone like you, who's a urologist by trade, that's kind of throwing themselves into the movement. And it seems like that's a contrast to Western medicine, where people tell doctors to really stay in their lane. Hey, you're a urologist, don't talk about diet and lifestyle. I love that you're bridging that gap and speaking up about such an important message. I'm just curious for you, Dr. Tracy, what was your light bulb moment of like, damn, things are seriously wrong and we need a course correct. And I need to put content out there and spread this message. Otherwise, we're going to be in a really bad spot 2 decades from now.
Yeah, like most docs who make the transition and who suddenly wake up and see the light, it was from my own personal selfish reasons where it started. I found myself, this is about 10, 12 years ago now, when I suddenly noticed those changes happening in me. And I was a busy urologist. I was in the hospital every night, it seemed, operating, doing robotic surgery till late hours, and dedicated myself to my clients, my patients, while I was neglecting my own health. And woke up one day and I'm suddenly 30 pounds overweight and I look like crap. I feel like crap. I'm not sleeping. I'm stressed out. I'm not exercising. And my blood work was terrible. And the scary part for me was when my primary care doctor really had no answers for me at all, other than lose weight. And if it doesn't get better, I might need a statin. That was really it. That was all he had for me. And my T levels, this was common in my practice as well, where those levels are dropping every year. The testosterone levels we talked about are dropping. But what that's doing is when you look at a lab slip, LabCorp, Quest, et cetera, their reference range is simply based on the average of all the millions of lab tests that they're doing. And so that range keeps slowly dropping lower and lower and lower. And so doctors are telling patients, no, you're fine. You're in the reference range. You're, God forbid the word normal. It's bullshit. It's total bullshit. But we are led into the sense of complacency because that reference range keeps getting lower and lower, and you're in that range. You're told you're okay. You're told you're normal. And in the matrix of the insurance-driven healthcare world, you can't even get testosterone if you wanted it because doctors won't prescribe it. And so it's a broken system. And through my own health issues, I was suddenly made very aware of this, and that got me going down one rabbit hole after another, learning about how do you truly optimize hormones, how do you incorporate lifestyle, how do you eat the right foods, how do you use genetics to understand what's right for your body, to understand what nutrition programs might be best for you, how do you do proper functional testing, how do I clean up my gut, and what's scary is that we have this medical profession that everyone's relying on, like medical doctors in our healthcare system. And guess how many days, let alone days, guess how many hours we're taught about nutrition in medical school? You know the answer. 0.
0.
Nothing. How about sleep? 0. How about fitness? 0. How about stress mitigation and all that, or on mindset? Nothing. Mm-hmm. It's all really diagnosis, drug, diagnosis, drug. And I was suddenly able to see the light. And once you see that, you can't unsee it.
Would you, when you were at that point of seeing the light, were you talking to any other doctors and being like, are you guys seeing this too? Like how messed up this is? Because I can imagine being on the inside, it's a little bit uncomfortable. Seeing that there's a lot of problems within the system and being the person who wants to actually acknowledge it and then start actually acting on it.
Yeah, it was a great question. Very interesting transition for me where I became somewhat of an outcast in my traditional healthcare world, or the hospital, when you go to the surgeon's lounge, between cases, or you're lunch at the doctor's lounge in the hospital. And I'm talking about this stuff, and the other doctors look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what are you like? Why are you worrying about that stuff? What are you doing? And just give him testosterone. Why are you worried about all that other stuff? Just give him testosterone, or if the T levels are normal, leave him alone. And so it became very apparent very quickly that I was going in a different direction. And I decided, this was maybe 6 years ago, that I was going to someday get away from traditional healthcare. And I kept studying and taking courses and getting certified in all these different fields of peptides and hormones and epigenetics. And then I gave my practice notice I'm leaving. And I'll tell you, they thought I was batshit crazy for leaving. Like, what are you doing? You're throwing away a lucrative surgical career. And I now only regret that it took me that long to make the move.
Wow.
Because it's amazing the difference that you can make when you focus on the stuff that really matters.
Dr. Tracy, how difficult is it in modern society to build out like an unconventional functional practice?
It's not easy. You have to first, my passion is men's health. That's where I've lived for 25 plus years now in urology. That was my focus from the beginning. And so for me, that was somewhat of an easy transition for me. But a lot of my clients were still wanting to use insurance and they didn't understand why their copay didn't work, for example, or they wanted to just get a prescription drug. Like they weren't wanting to spend the time, effort, money on doing the hard work, like understanding what should I be eating and tracking macros and tracking sleep and looking at blood sugar regulation and looking at data that matters and how do your genetics apply. And so a lot of it was getting my patients to recognize that mindset shift. And what I ultimately found was that the patients I had in my urology career, in my urology practice, they were so stuck in that insurance model, disease focused system that it was hard to get them out of it. So it takes people opening their mind, recognizing how it's not all about pharmaceuticals. And there's a lot that we can do outside of that. And it's just a different mindset.
Do you have a sense? So I feel like this is kind of a simple question, but I feel like it's important to be said. So for someone who is worried about their testosterone levels and maybe doesn't want to have to go through the process of getting blood work done, what sort of things would they be experiencing? And like, what would you recommend next steps being in terms of actually figuring out, like blood work, obvious answer, but like, what might people need to be paying attention to if they think that their testosterone is affecting their health?
Sure. So sometimes men with low testosterone will have no symptoms whatsoever. They feel fine. They don't realize how they are not at an optimized state. But some men will develop issues with low energy, fatigue, especially later in the afternoon. Guys may want to take a nap. And to me, that's a red flag. If you're wanting to take a nap in the middle of the day, typically that means something's just not quite right. Your recovery is not like it used to be, where you used to be able to train in the gym every day and feel great the next day. Guys suddenly find it takes 2 or 3 days to recover, which is new. Some guys may have issues with cognitive function where they just can't quite think as clearly as they did before. So, some guys call it brain fog, where they're just not able to focus. Mental acuity is off slightly. And most of the time it's subtle. Most of the time it's not a dramatic shift. It's a gradual, slow transition that happens over many years. Guys may notice that they're starting to suddenly carry more fat around the belly and they can't shake it. And they used to be able to go to the gym and burn it off quickly, and now suddenly they can't. Men will have trouble sleeping. A common symptom with low T is difficulty sleeping. Men may have issues with difficulty building muscle. They can't build like they did before. They're losing muscle mass as well. The obvious ones would be, decreased sex drive, decreased libido. I've seen so many cases where couples will come in and the woman's concerned because, doc, my husband has been chasing me around the house for years and suddenly I'm chasing him. Like something's not quite right here. And I actually had one couple of years ago where the woman swore that he was cheating on her, even though he wasn't, but that was creating those issues.
Wow.
So a wide array of symptoms that may be an indicator of low T. But I'll tell you guys, I have tested so many men who have really no symptoms whatsoever, and their T levels are in the tank, and they're somehow compensating. They're getting by through other means. Cortisol is our stress hormone. We could talk a lot about how cortisol crushes everything. Chronic cortisol elevation crushes testosterone, crushes your gut, crushes other hormones, makes you store fat, etc. But a lot of guys are running and thriving on cortisol until that burns out and suddenly they crash.
Yeah, that's super important information. And the story that you said about that couple, it actually reminds me of a podcast interview we did with this gentleman, Josh Whalen, who's the founder of Blokes, a male telemedicine company.
Yeah.
He actually said, the people that compliment me the most and thank me are not the male patients I have, but actually the wives of the male patients. Because to your point, it's like we think about testosterone as this like arbitrary number, when it actually is a reflection of almost who you are as a man and as a human being in general. So it just makes you realize that it's so much more important than a number of it on a screen. It's actually a gateway to become a better person. And the difficult, like you said, I think you alluded to the fact that this decline in testosterone is it's this very gradual process over time that comes from probably not making the right decisions that compound over time. And it makes me think about the fact that it's like all these choices that really add up, and you're ultimately in control of that, which is why we need to identify what the right biomarkers are. That way we can understand where our baseline is at and actually make those changes. So, Dr. Tracy, what are the right biomarkers that men should be looking for that actually signify if you're in good health or not?
Yeah, I love that question. And I just want to reflect briefly on what you just said, because it's such a powerful statement that, women drive most healthcare decisions. The wives are the ones that get men to seek attention. And I've spoken on so many women's podcasts, women's health arenas, where they're all clamoring, like, how do I get my man to wake up and do this? And their mood is off. And you're right that the women are the ones that often are the ones that pay attention more than the guys. So for sure, women out there, get your dude tested. Simple, easy blood test, check your free T. But to answer your question, I like to look at low testosterone as a symptom of an underlying problem, not the problem itself. And this is where I think sometimes we miss the mark, where so often the answer is, well, just give them testosterone. And no offense to any company out there selling testosterone, but whether in person, online, whatever. But I look at it as a symptom of an underlying problem. And so I want to look at what are the other markers, other biomarkers of those underlying problems that are causing these symptoms. For example, when we have low testosterone, we almost always have low DHEA, which is a steroid hormone. It's a precursor to testosterone, and it's a very important hormone in and of itself. And almost every man that has low T has low DHEA as well, because that steroid hormone pathway is just not working properly. They will often have low thyroid as well. Thyroid is typically thought of as a women's hormone, but it's important for men as well. And it's a hormone that's important when it comes to metabolism, mood, energy, sleep. It helps regulate gut health. It's intimately tied to balance with cortisol, or a stress hormone. And so thyroid is super important as well. Most guys with low T and low DHEA have low thyroid as well. Vitamin D, it's not a vitamin, it's actually technically a hormone. I'm here in Sarasota, Florida, and I'll tell you, nearly every guy I check has low vitamin D levels, and that's surprising. You think, sunlight, you have, your body, your skin makes vitamin D from sunlight, but most men, even here in Florida, are deficient in vitamin D. Nitric oxide, a key hormone related to blood flow and vasodilation and vascular health. So many men have deficient levels of nitric oxide. Blood sugar regulation. I'll do testing to look, a fasting blood sugar. It should be under 95 for sure, if preferably under 90. Hemoglobin A1C is a longer term marker of blood sugar. That should be under 5.4. Fasting insulin is probably the best marker to look for blood sugar regulation. Guys, the high performing guy that I work with, he's the 45-year-old entrepreneur. He's grinding hard. He's staying up late working. He's waking up early. He's trying to do the Gary V thing, where he's just, driving himself into the ground. His cortisol levels are through the roof. His hormone levels are in the tank. Blood sugar is chronically elevated because of that. And what does that do? It crushes energy, makes you store fat, can't build muscle. And it has a lot of, downstream cascading effects on things like the gut and immune function.
Mm-hmm.
So markers of blood sugar are so important. We can look at cardiovascular health markers. The typical cholesterol panel honestly sucks. It's such a narrow view of lipid health. But things that do matter are things like LP(a). LP(a) is a subtype of LDL that is typically inherited, and it's a marker that you're at increased cardiovascular risk. Other markers, apolipoprotein B, or ApoB, is probably the best lipid marker that we have. LDLP, which is different than the typical LDL you get from your doctor. LDLP is the particle number, and we know that the particle number is more accurate or more predictive than LDL concentration, which is what we typically get. How do you treat those is a whole other conversation, but nonetheless, those are very helpful markers for cardiovascular health. So you see how I've just gone through, I rattled off a few here, just so you can understand that testosterone, yeah, it's important. It gets all the attention, but shit, we have all this other stuff that we need to be paying attention to as well. And that's why low T, I really look at it as a symptom of a much bigger underlying problem.
There's so much good information on what you just said. I'm actually fascinated by that Gary V archetype, that 45-year-old high performer, where
Yeah.
he's cranking, he loves the feeling of working hard. He's probably deprioritizing sleep because he's so motivated on building his business. How do you convince someone like that to get some of these biomarkers in check or get more sleep? Because it's so tough when you almost have that addiction to success. And I would imagine that, I don't know if a patient like that is difficult to deal with, but I would imagine that is probably difficult.
So great point. It's a mindset shift. How do you get a guy who thinks he's doing everything right to realize that he's doing everything wrong? Because that's what it comes down to, right? It's pivoting. And you ask him, are you stressed? No, I'm not stressed. Come on, I'm not stressed. I can see, I'm fine. Every guy says the same thing. I'm not stressed. Stress doesn't bother me. It doesn't affect me, etc. And so I am all about data. I love metrics. I love KPIs. I love data. And there's a thing called the Hawthorne effect that has shown that when you track something, it changes behavior. Studies have found that just by monitoring or tracking something, it changes the way you act around that. And so I will rely on data for this kind of stuff. So I'm obsessed with tracking data as it relates to blood sugar. So my clients, we do CGM tracking. Anyone out there can get, you can go online, you can actually buy it directly yourself. CGM tracking, there's several direct-to-consumer companies, and we use companies that work with us directly to provide dashboards where you can see your blood sugar and see how your food and your behavior and your crummy sleep and your stress is affecting blood sugar real time, 24/7. Like the data doesn't lie. You could track sleep. There's a ton of ways to track sleep out there. I love the Aura Ring. It's probably the most validated device on the market. I have no financial interest in them, but the studies have shown that they're as accurate as you can get as compared to sleep study data to track quality of sleep. And we know from studies that deep sleep and REM sleep are the two stages of sleep that really, really matter. We can track stress through a metric called heart rate variability, or HRV. And HRV is a metric of the balance of your nervous system. And in general, higher is good, lower is bad, but you don't want a lot of fluctuations either. So if your HRV suddenly spikes up really high, that's actually not a good thing, although you may think high is good. It's more about balance, but you want to be slowly getting better over time. HRV is a daily metric that you can measure. And I do this with my Polar H10 strap every morning at 6 a.m. I wake up. The first thing I do is I measure my HRV. And I can now compare that from one day to the next. And example, my wife and I took one of the practitioners in my practice, took her and her husband to dinner Saturday night. I had one freaking glass of wine. I never drink. I hate drinking. And I'm like, fine, social situation, one glass of wine. And my HRV tanked the next day. Real-time data, it tanked.
From one glass.
So one glass of, for me, just one glass of wine. I try like, this is a New Zealand white. I know the California Pinots crush me. I've tried the French ones. I think it's just the alcohol itself. It hits me hard. But the point of it is whether it's blood sugar data, whether it's sleep data, where there's HRV numbers, and we can also talk about, tracking body composition, looking at tracking lean muscle mass and visceral fat. Numbers don't lie, right? Tracking macros, numbers don't lie. When you see the numbers, it changes behavior. And so what I rely on, honestly, is using data to help drive decisions. And look, it's not that you can't ever have a glass of wine. That's obviously not the point. But now I can't unsee that drop in my HRV that day. Like, you see that and you're like, holy shit. So next time, maybe I'll have a glass share with my wife. I don't know. But for the guys who are out there having 3, 4, 5 drinks a night and they see that data, maybe now they'll only have one glass, for example. Maybe they'll cut their alcohol intake in half and see that it's not crushing their HRV. And you're wanting to build muscle, Joe. You're wanting to burn fat. You're wanting to have better energy. But look at the data. Look, this is the data that you're producing. So you can't expect to have this outcome if you don't change this behavior. And so, to me, that's how the Hawthorne effect comes into play. How you can use data to drive that.
Mm. It's so amazing what's happening right now with medicine, where we're getting these tools that are coming into much more of the common arena, where you can track your sleep, you can track your blood glucose, you can get blood work done. It's becoming more popular. So it gives me a lot of hope. The one thing that you mentioned earlier, the vitamin D levels, is really fascinating to me, because vitamin D plays a massive role in how we metabolize glucose, or how glucose is metabolized in the body. And I think about the metabolic crisis. I'm like, is this a vitamin D problem? Like, and I think it's like a part of it. It's not the whole thing, but it's just really fascinating that vitamin D is across the board a deficiency that you see, and that coincides with the testosterone, lower testosterone as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, the other facet to that is there are several studies that show that people with vitamin D deficiency had much worse outcomes related to COVID as well. And so there's definitely an immune function interface there too.
Do you think that vitamin D deficiency is driven purely through just we're spending more time inside, or is there something else that is taking away from like our body's uptake of vitamin D?
Yeah, I do think there's something else at play, and I can't tell you know what that answer is. We do a lot of work with genetics, personalized genetics to individualize stuff like that. And there are genetics related to vitamin D production. You know, there's a conversion of vitamin D. There's a couple of different steps in that pathway to produce the end product of vitamin D, if you will. And so sometimes it may just be steps in that conversion of 125 hydroxy, and you have 25 hydroxy, 125 hydroxy. And sometimes it may be in that pathway where it's not happening efficiently. To answer your question, I'm sure there's other factors at play, but I can't tell you exactly what that is. But it's definitely not sunlight alone, because I have guys here in Florida who are out on the beach every weekend and their levels are still in the tank.
Yeah, interesting.
Got it.
Yeah.
It sounds like when it comes to men's health for you, there are so many different levers that we can pull, whether it's food, whether it's lifestyle, whether it's stress, CGM, sleep, etc. It's like there's probably an incredibly comprehensive list.
Yeah.
Say you're working with a client, he's like 20 to 30 pounds overweight, his testosterone is in the tank. Is there a particular lever that you're going to first pull that's at the highest priority? Maybe it's sleep, whether it's nutrition. I'd love to just learn more about your approach when you're taking that patient that has a lot of work to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I do have a methodology. It's my precision method. It's discovery, diagnostics, data, and design. And discovery is where we first understand what's your why, what are we trying to accomplish. Like a guy this morning, a guy from California I was working with, his main goals is he wants to be able to ski again. He wants to be able to scuba dive again and play tennis. That's his why. So everything we do is we focus on how do I get him back to playing these sports and doing these activities. Some other guy, maybe I just want to have sex with my wife. You know, so first of all, it's important to do that. Then the diagnostics, where we do the advanced testing to find what are the blind spots. And so, you know, to answer your question specifically, it depends on what those blind spots are. And we all have blind spots that are under the surface. They're just lurking, waiting to cause a problem that you don't even know. It may be hormones, it may be blood sugar, it may be gut, it may be inflammation from toxins. You know, I had a guy who had tremendous fatigue. And the first thing I did was fix his hormones. I cleaned up his nutrition. I fixed his sleep and micronutrients, and nothing helped. And we're like, damn. So we did further testing. Come to find out, he had mold in his gut.
Wow.
Mold. And we tracked it back to he had a water leak in his home. He had massive black mold in the walls of his house.
Wow.
So, like, certainly black mold is not the first thing I do. And that's not, you know, I'm not the black mold doctor. But we were able to go through the testing to find that hidden blind spot that was ultimately the source of his fatigue. And every guy is so different, right? So it's all about the diagnostics. And then the data is where we talked just a few moments ago about personalized, you know, biometric tracking to understand if what you're doing is working or not, whether it's genetics or wearable, sleep, stress, blood sugar, et cetera. And then the design, honestly, is where I put it all together. So that's where I answer your question. And it comes back to understanding what are those blind spots. In general, hormones is very early in that process. And I'll tell you why. If a guy needs to lose 30 pounds and his T is low, his thyroid is low, DHEA is low, blood sugar is high, cortisol is high, nitric oxide is low, all these, imbalances in hormones. And I try to get him on a fitness program. Is he going to be motivated to do that fitness program? Hell no. If he's not sleeping, is he going to have the right hunger and satiety signals and the right desire to eat the right foods that he knows? No, he's gonna be eating like shit because he's not there yet, And so I am big on creating motivation and momentum in the beginning. And the way you do that is by fix the low-hanging fruit first. And so it is often fixing hormones first. It's fixing testosterone, thyroid, DHEA, vitamin D, nitric oxide, all these hormones, getting a guy sleeping as well, fixing some basic micronutrient levels, cleaning up the gut, and getting to start tracking data. And then you could really start to dial deep into what's the nuance of what you have to address from there. And once I get a guy's hormones optimized, I get him sleeping well, I get him now eating the right foods. Now he's ready to hit the gym and do the work that he's got to do because he's now motivated and he has some momentum at that point. And that just takes a little bit of time to get there.
You've mentioned gut health a few times. What's your protocol for really addressing gut health issues that people are having, or just kind of getting in a state where your gut is at like homeostasis and kind of back to normal? Because I imagine a lot of people actually have gut issues, whether it's bloating or some microinflammation or leaky gut, and they don't even really realize it.
Yeah. It's crazy. Back in my urology days, we had no appreciation for the gut whatsoever. We just thought you do colonoscopy, no cancer, you're good, whatever. Now I'm so aware of how the gut controls everything. It controls hormone production, neurotransmitter production in the brain. It controls mood. It controls metabolism, immune function. Like freaking everything is in one way or another controlled by the gut. It's fascinating. And so to answer your question, protocol, there's some general recommendations and then some nuanced, personalized. From a general perspective, it's nutrition. And I know you guys talk a lot about this on your podcast, and I've listened to a ton of your great content out there. Gluten is, I don't want to say poison, but it's like poison to the gut for most people. I don't care if you're celiac or not. We're talking about just the general comers. In general, gluten is very inflammatory. A lot of the processed refined sugars, our diet, our standard American diet is very low in fiber, and fiber is underappreciated how much it feeds the good microbiome, the good, I don't want to say good bugs, but the healthy commensal bacteria in our gut that you need. So let me show you how this all kind of ties together. So one of the keystone bacteria in our gut that we care about, Akkermansia. Akkermansia, we have learned, is a critical bug in the gut. And what does Akkermansia do? Well, among other things, it regulates blood sugar by activating the L cell. The L cell is a type of cell in our gut that produces a hormone called GLP-1. Okay, GLP-1 is what actually helps you maintain optimal blood sugar levels. It helps the pancreas produce more insulin. It tells the brain to quit eating. It tells the stomach you're full. And in fact, you've heard of semaglutide, Wegovy, Ozempic. That is a GLP-1 agonist. That is a drug that mimics that hormone.
Wow.
Whereas if you just had healthy optimal Akkermansia levels, it's going to tell your L cell in the gut to make more GLP-1. It's like the natural healthy version of semaglutide, if you will. And so maintaining that healthy bacteria is so important. And so getting rid of the refined sugars, getting rid of pro-inflammatory, the seed oils. I know you've had other episodes on seed oils, so I don't want to belabor that point, but it's getting rid of all the pro-inflammatory foods, focusing on increasing fiber, focusing on increasing intake of clean, real food. That's what everyone should be doing. And then we do testing. Again, it goes back to data. And so we'll do GI testing, and there are a couple different tests out there, the GI effects, the GI map, where you can actually look at markers of inflammation in the gut. You can look at markers of digestive function. You look at markers of your detoxification system. And you can look at the balance of the good bugs and the bad bugs, so to speak. I hate that terminology, but for the layperson, I think that makes it easiest to understand. You want a good broad diversity of your microbiome, and nutrition is the first way to do that.
Yeah, I really appreciate the nuance that you have around fiber because, obviously you're on the Meat Mafia podcast. We've talked a lot about carnivore diets, animal-based diets. Yeah. And it seems like the health space in general is so polarizing that it's actually difficult for the average person off the street that's trying to make sustainable change to figure out what they want to do, because you have one camp of people that are meat-based that are saying, oh, you don't need fiber. Fiber is overrated. There's people that are saying that fiber is necessary. So it's good to just get that nuanced take that it actually is necessary and you should be incorporating it into your diet.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, I laugh. I'm on Twitter a lot, and I laugh at the constant battles over the perfect diet. The carnivores versus the paleos versus the vegans versus the plant-based versus the omnivores versus the pescatarian. Like, it's comical to me because everyone's different, and based on your genetics, based on your environment, based on so many factors, what the optimal diet is for you can vary.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's not necessarily what you're eating, but more so what you're not eating. And that's what they actually all have in common, right? All these people who are battling, we can all agree on: get rid of the refined sugars, get rid of the processed packaged crap, get rid of the inflammatory seed oils, and focusing on eating real foods. And then you realize we don't have much differences, right?
Yeah. We have a lot more similarities than people realize too.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
What's an ideal day of eating look like for you? What kind of foods are you gravitating towards that make you feel really good? I know obviously gluten, seed oils, processed sugars you're staying away from, but yeah, what does the day of eating look like for you?
Yeah, so it varies. I'll fast typically about 3 days a week or so. But when I do break my fast, I'm obsessed with protein. And for most guys out there, your biggest flaw is not eating enough protein. And so a really good target for you is your ideal body weight in grams of protein. So for me, I weigh about 162 right now. And so my target is 160 grams of protein a day. And for most guys, that's freaking hard. You have to work at it, right? And so typically my first meal of the day will be a whey protein shake. And I'll use coconut water. I'll put berries, typically 4 or 5 strawberries. I'll use maybe like a quarter or a third of banana, just add a little bit of sweetness to it. I'll use a scoop and a half of whey protein. So I'm getting probably 35, 40 grams of protein right there, and some ice. Purely clean. There's no garbage in there. There's no other nonsense. I don't like the greens in there. I've tried the spinach and kale and all that shit. I can't do it. My wife does that. But that's my first meal. What's that?
I said I'll shit myself if I do that.
There you go, right? And so I'll start with that. I typically will add Greek yogurt specifically to get the protein. I'll add a little cottage cheese as well. And by now I've eaten like 50, 60 grams of protein with just what I just mentioned right there. My lunch tends to be pretty light, typically like a salad with grilled chicken, something like that. I like tuna, so sometimes I'll make tuna as well. And then dinner, we're super clean. We will sometimes eat bison. I will eat chicken. We'll eat fish. I try to incorporate veggies. We don't eat much from a package, products like that. We tend to cook as much as we can. When I do go out, this is important for the listener. When you do go out, you need to be sure that you're asking that they don't cook with oils. So any restaurant you go, if they're cooking your food, they're using the omega-6 oils, the cottonseed oil, the soybean oil, shit like that, that is added inflammation for no reason. And so try to get them to cook with no oil, light oil at least. But the best way to avoid that is just eat at home.
Yeah. Tracy, do you have a perspective on fattier cuts of meat or red meat? And the reason why I'm saying that is you mentioned ApoB.
Yeah.
And, our CFO of our business, really lean guy, really good athlete. He probably walks around at like 150 pounds, and he was doing a really red meat heavy diet, and his ApoB got really jacked up. So he's been switching to leaner cuts of meat. And, maybe for him, but also just the listener in general, do you have a perspective on, red meat, fattier cuts of meat?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is an interesting time in society with the whole LMHR battles going on right now as well. The lean mass hyper-responders, for those who are listening. What that basically means is guys who are on keto, high saturated fat diet, they're finding massive increases in their ApoB or LDL particle number, and the real question is, well, does it matter? What does that mean? What's the long-term outcome of that? And we don't know, honestly. It's too soon to honestly know. But in general, to answer your question, I try, and for my clients, I recommend to try to keep your saturated fat intake to under 10% of your daily caloric intake. So the general rule of thumb is and you could track your macros to find these numbers. In general, I recommend saturated fat. I'm okay with to a point, and I generally recommend keep it under 10% if you can for most guys. And that's for a week. So if you have more one meal versus another, that's okay. We're talking on a week-long basis, so you can spread that out, obviously. And so for that reason, I do tend to lean toward filet. I do like the leaner cuts just personally myself. I like it. I think that the key point here is genetics dictate your response. And so what I mean by that is there are several genes that regulate how your body processes saturated fat. The most common one most people hear about, talk about, is the ApoE gene. PPAR gamma is another one. These genes all speak to how does your body metabolize saturated fats. I am an ApoE33. An ApoE33 means that it doesn't affect me nearly as much as other people. Other people, my wife is a 3-4. Other people may be a ApoE44. Now, if you have a 4, an allele, either one or two of those copies of the ApoE4 variant, what that means is that you are, in general, at an increased risk of developing cognitive decline, cognitive impairment, and even Alzheimer's disease and early cardiovascular disease. But that risk can be eliminated completely by simply reducing your sugar intake and reducing your saturated fat intake. And so for those people, people who have an ApoE3-4 or especially a 4-4, you need to be limiting your saturated fats to 5% or less. Doesn't mean you can't eat red meat, but now it's going to be much more on the filet version, obviously. And so that's where there's nuance that comes into play. Some people can do fine with it, obviously. I think the key, again, though, still comes back to what are you not eating? And I think that when it comes to cardiovascular disease, cardiovascular risk, you can look at LDL particle number, you can look at Lp(a), you can look at ApoB and all these other numbers. Sometimes the blood sugar regulation numbers may be even more important, and the insulin sensitivity markers, and the HDL triglyceride ratio, which is more indicative of blood sugar regulation, may be more impactful than the LDL numbers. And that's what the big battle is right now in social is understanding who's right, who's wrong, and we just don't know.
It's so interesting following along with Dave Feldman's work and Nick Norwitz. We had them on the podcast a while ago, and they've just been doing such good work on understanding the lipids, our understanding of lipids, and it's really cool seeing what they're doing. Like the Oreos versus statins thing was a unique perspective.
Twitter's a fire again today. Here we are today, February 7th, and Twitter's going crazy over this battle with Dayspring in the middle of all this, and it's crazy. And so if you think about the process of atherosclerosis, you need lipid particles to get under the surface of the endothelium of the blood vessel to create a plaque. But that's not enough. You actually need oxidation as well, and you need an inflammatory response for anything to happen. Otherwise, the LDL particle brings it under the surface of the blood vessel, the HDL particle brings it back out, no harm, no foul, nothing done. And so the point that Feldman and others make, which is very valid, is that LDL alone doesn't tell the whole story, because the metabolic health issues, blood sugar regulation, oxidation, immune function all come into play as well. And that's where we just don't know yet. But I believe that it can't be all just LDL alone.
So interesting. You guys talking about kind of your ideal day of eating or what you eat in a day got me thinking about just habit formation and the importance of actually being able to communicate how to do some of this stuff. Because the way I look at it is there's information out there all across the board, but most people generally know good versus bad, like getting more sleep versus getting less sleep, like which one's better for you. And I just think it's very hard to actually implement some of these things. So I'm curious how you approach the actual habit formation side of things and really try to help your patients make some of these things permanent.
Love it. Love the question. So I am obsessed with BJ Fogg's book, Tiny Habits, first of all. In fact, everyone should read this book, Tiny Habits. It's so amazing for whether it's for your business, whether it's personally. How do you establish consistent daily habits? Atomic Habits is great as well. I like them both, but Tiny Habits is really what has impacted me the most. For me, this kind of stuff is easy because I've been doing it for so long now. I've been eating clean foods like this forever, that it's really just refining, finding new recipes to use the same ingredients in different ways. And so that's never really been a huge challenge for me. Around the holidays, I could say everybody probably gets tempted a lot. But when you look at how to create a habit, it cannot be motivation alone. Willpower alone cannot get you there. It'll get you there for a few days, kind of like going to the gym. You know, New Year's, the first week of January, everyone's going to the gym, and then suddenly by now, this time in February, they've already stopped. You think about, how do you create that habit? Well, there's motivation, which is your y-axis. There's ability, which is your x-axis. And anything you could think of can be plotted on that graph, if you will, of how easy is it to get that food and how motivated am I to eat it, right? So if you have no healthy food in the house, I don't care how motivated you are on the y-axis, you're very far to the left on the x-axis because you don't have the food. You don't have the ability to make those foods because you have to go to the grocery, you don't know what to get, etc. There's an action curve that BJ Fogg talks about, a curve that the plot of that graph, that habit has to be far enough to the right on that graph above that action curve for that habit to stick. So the way to think about it is how do I move that habit further on the ability axis, on the x-axis? Yeah, you're motivated to eat the right foods, but now if I can stuff your fridge full of all these great healthy foods, now it's right there for you. And you've moved over on the x-axis. Now you're above that action curve that habit's likely going to happen. And then you need the third part, you need a prompt. He talks about behavior equals MAP, behavior equals motivation, ability, and prompt. Now you need a prompt as well. And so the key is you give guys a shopping list. Joe, first of all, you know, when I work with a guy, the first health assessment I do, the intake, is what foods do you like to eat? Just tell me what you like to eat. Tell me everything. And we have a full massive list of meats, vegetables, fruits, spices. And now from that, we can say, go to the grocery store and just buy a bunch of this stuff that we know is good for you. And now it comes down to prepping that food. So it's right there in the you open the door and you have no choice but to eat these healthy foods because they're right there freaking in front of you. Yes. Because you've increased the ability to establish that healthy habit. And so long answer to your question of it's a combination of motivation, ability, and a prompt. And BJ Fogg's book is amazing at helping you kind of put that in motion. Typically, the biggest driver of that is to increase ability. And when it comes to food, it's a matter of not having the bad food, bad choices in your kitchen, loading it with the good choices, and that's going to make that habit so much easier to implement. So like in the morning, for example, when I'm getting ready for work, I open the fridge. My Greek yogurt is right there. My cottage cheese is right there. I have an apple for a snack late in the day. It's there. My strawberries and blueberries are there for my smoothie. They're right, like it's all ready to go. Boom, boom, boom. There's no crap in there. There's no other stuff that's going to even remotely tempt me to eat the wrong foods because they're just not even available.
Well,
that's how you create habit change. And people try willpower. Willpower does not last. It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. It's such a good, honest answer. And, you know, even for me as like an informed consumer, I probably know as much as you could possibly know about what foods are good for me versus what foods are bad for me. But if I keep Siete chips or, you know, the fringe snacks in my apartment, I know I'm just going to crush those things if I get healthy versus like, you know, if I'm in the office and I don't prep or have anything here, I know I'm so much more likely to go out and probably eat a lunch that's not ultimately good for me. So it's like, there's these little hacks that can just stack up over time that seem so intuitive, but they're super impactful. So like if you love chicken thighs and you're going to make chicken thighs for dinner, just make 2 portions. So you can then pack it in a glass Tupperware container, bring it in for lunch. Or even what we do is we just have a little Ninja air fryer at the office. So if I don't have time to cook, I can just get a steak from the grocery store, bring it in, and you have like an amazing steak ready to go in 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
One of the things you touched on earlier was TRT, and I really appreciated your perspective on that because we've had a lot of guests that are on TRT, and Harry and I have kind of had that perspective in the back of our minds. How necessary is this? Should it be more of a last resort type of thing? You know, how can you increase your testosterone until you rely on TRT? So for you as a doctor, is TRT like the last resort for a patient? Will you ever put a guy on TRT? I just your perspective on that.
Yeah. So great question. The 3-part answer, T. I'll try to keep it brief. The first part is how do you increase testosterone naturally? Strength training, resistance training, heavy weights. We're talking like quads, hamstrings, core, back, abs, those big belly muscles are the ones that you want to be working. That's been shown to increase testosterone levels. Improving sleep quality, not just sleep duration, time, quantity, but quality. That means deep sleep and REM sleep are really important for testosterone levels as well. Sometimes it's a catch-22 though, because low testosterone crushes sleep and it becomes a battle. Sunlight has been shown to help testosterone. And in fact, sunlight on the scrotum has been shown to increase testosterone production as well.
Wow.
So all you guys go out there in the morning first, especially first thing in the morning, go out and get sun for 15 minutes and go out in your backyard and do it naked, because sun on the balls has been shown to increase testosterone. Not much, but it definitely can help.
You might be the first doctor that I've ever heard that's telling you to.
Right, there you go. I come loaded for you. Micronutrients are important. Zinc, magnesium, B vitamins are certainly important when it comes to testosterone production as well. People talk about eating cholesterol. Typically, dietary cholesterol doesn't convert to body. You have enough cholesterol in your body, so that's not really a big issue. Stress, mitigating or reducing stress. We know that chronic cortisol elevation crushes testosterone. We know that chronic blood sugar imbalance, insulin resistance can affect testosterone. So working on that kind of stuff as well. All that can directly impact testosterone. That's the first part. The second part, how much does it actually do? Like, how much can I move the needle? And I've heard all these anecdotes online. I'll tell you, the reality is, in my practice, 25 years doing urology, doing men's health, seeing labs, guys come in and the number we care about is free testosterone, right? Free testosterone is a bioavailable active form of testosterone. And we want that to be typically around 20 or so. Okay, 20 is a good target. Now, some lab scale, it may be a different scale where it's a factor of 10, so it'd be 200, but nonetheless, 20 is our target, or 200 depending on the lab. A lot of guys will come in. I'm talking like a healthy 35-year-old dude, has no symptoms. He just wants to get checked, and his free T is 6. Swear to God, happens all the time. Somewhere between 6, 8, 9. Consistently, I'll see these guys with no symptoms or maybe a little bit of cognitive stuff. 35 years old, healthy, 6. And so if you were to do all of the stuff I just talked about, the natural approaches, consistently for 3 months to 6 months, what I have found is that'll get you maybe 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe. So it helps, yes. And you have a long way to go still. This is what I find. And the problem is, most guys are not going to be vigilant enough to do all those things anyway. So I talked earlier about, lack of momentum. If a guy is fatigued, tired, doesn't have the drive, in a bad mood, all because of low T, getting him to do all these natural things he needs to do is so tough, because he's just not motivated. He just doesn't give a shit, right? Yeah. And so it becomes a catch-22 there, where the natural stuff sounds great, but in reality, it never quite gets you to 20 where you need to be. I am on T myself. Okay, just to show you that I practice what I preach, and my levels were 8, and I'm on testosterone therapy myself now as well, so I can share with my clients, personal story as well. So that's the second part of the story. The third question then is, well, if I'm on TRT, like, when can I get off of it? How long does it need to last? That's like, when can I stop it? And I like to turn that question around a little bit. So why are you on TRT? You're on TRT because your level was 6. And why? We can talk about toxins in our environment. We talk about epigenetics from your parents, passing down from generations. We can talk about your stress. We talk about your shitty diet, your lack of sleep, all these bad things that have caused it, right? A lot of that you can fix. A lot of it you cannot fix. And so one way or the other, your testosterone level's in the tank, and I got to get it to where it needs to be. When I get it to where it needs to be, what's going to happen is you're going to feel like a transformation. You're going to feel like a new guy. You're going to feel like a man again. You're going to have the energy. You're going to have the mood. You're going to have the motivation, the drive. You're going to have the metabolism. You're going to be able to train and build muscle and burn fat again. You're going to have sex again. And all these great things that guys want, you're going to be able to have again. My question then becomes, why on earth would you ever want to stop that? And that's what guys say. Guys like, you're not going to stop this, are you? Like, once they get on it, they don't want to ever stop. And so that question, the guys who ask that question are the guys who are not on TRT, because once you're on TRT, you're like, you're never freaking stopping this.
Yeah.
That's the real answer.
Did you just feel too good?
Yeah, it fixes the problem. And now you're driven to do all the right things you need to do.
Yeah,
and, a lot of it, there's some great science, some published literature around the transgenerational epigenetic effect of toxins in our environment. lot of big fancy words there. For the listener, what that means is the stuff that your grandparents were exposed to affected their sperm permanently, which got passed down to your father. He got toxins in the environment affecting his sperm that then got passed down to you. So you're coming in behind the 8 ball the day you're born, where you already have the environmental effects of your ancestors that's affecting your testosterone production to begin with. So you can do all the right things, and that's probably why you can't ever get up to that 20 level I'm talking about, because the damage is already kind of done before you ever had a chance. Pretty scary.
When you think about this on the systemic level, how do you think about us actually reversing course here? Because it's probably not reasonable to think that everyone gets on testosterone and fixes this chicken and the egg situation where like you got to be doing these things in order to see the change and have your testosterone increase to begin with.
Yeah, great point.
And it's like, I don't know, it seems like the food and all the other factors that you're talking about are at such a place where it's really going to be challenging to see this actually change.
Yeah, and a lot of it, I would, if you ask me what's the single biggest culprit for low T, like what's the factor that's most responsible, it's toxins in our environment. I believe truly it's endocrine disruptors, which are chemicals, toxins in our environment that are clearly crushing hormone function and production. And so the biggest thing that we can do is limit exposure to those toxins and optimize our human operating system, if you will, to better handle and overcome exposure to those toxins as well. And that's the biggest thing that we can do. And listen, I'm all for small government. Stay the hell out of my way. I don't want regulation, but sometimes there needs to be some regulation of the chemicals that are being sprayed on our food that we're eating, the chemicals that the animals we're eating are getting exposed to. And so that, our drinking water is laden with women's birth control, with synthetic estrogen. And so these are real problems where there needs to be some sort of oversight, regulation, solution, because I think those are a big part of the problem.
Are you optimistic that we can pull back from the brink?
Some days, yes. Ask me tomorrow. No.
No, it's such a tough question.
It's tough. I mean, it's a battle, I'll put it that way. I hope that something changes soon. But I feel like the problem's still getting worse, not better.
Yeah. Well, I think what's encouraging are just more conversations like this, where it's about, like, I think a lot of what you've said today is controlling what you can control. So you have a very small sphere of influence, but you do have control of the foods that you put into your body and the lifestyle habits that you choose to form. And by doing some of these things, like, you can fundamentally transform who you are as a man, as a human being. And I would think that alone has to be encouraging for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah. At the individual level, there's a lot you can do. At a society level is where things just aren't really moving. You're exactly right. Yeah.
Dr. Tracy, I feel like we could talk to you all day about this. And honestly, we've gotten to a point where we're getting to the black pill part of the conversation where it's a little sad. So I think you've given people a ton of information to actually put into use and practical knowledge for people to apply, whether it's habit formation or just general information in terms of raising testosterone. So just wanted to thank you and appreciate all the work that you're doing. Where's the best people to send, or where's the best place to send people to find more about what you're doing?
I appreciate it. And I appreciate the work that you guys are doing as well. You're creating great content, and it's all about educating the public and getting them, aware of what they can do and the changes they can make, and incorporating behavior change. So appreciate that. My website is drtracygapin.com. My center is gapininstitute.com. I do have a gift I'll share with your listener. I have a high performance health handbook, which includes 15 strategies and tactics that every guy can start to incorporate into their daily life starting today. Super easy, and it's free. You can just text the word health, HEALTH, to the number 26786. And you'll get a free copy of my high performance health handbook. You'll also get a free copy of my best-selling book, Male 2.0, where I talk a lot about how do we overcome this testosterone epidemic.
Amazing.
That's amazing. What was that habits book that you recommended earlier too? We'll link to that in the show notes as well.
BJ Fogg, Fogg is his last name, and the book is called Tiny Habits.
Awesome. Well, Tracy, we're so appreciative of this, man. We're gonna have to come out to Florida to hang out with you in person because I feel like
man, that'd be fun.
steaks and get some sun would be good.
That'd be perfect.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.